Welcome back. Thank you for checking out the expo hall during the break or the lounges. Each year, we like to shine a spotlight on authors, filmmakers, visual and written artists. Yesterday, we spoke with Catherine Wilkinson, co-editor of All We Can... Sorry about that. And today, we'll be speaking with one of the poets that was included in that anthology, Joan Naviyuk Kane. Joan is Inupiaq with family from Uyuvaq and Kawiruk. The author of 8 collections of poetry and prose, she teaches creative writing at Harvard, is a lecturer in the Department of Studies in Race, Colonialism, and Diaspora at Tufts, and was founding faculty of the Graduate Creative Writing Program at the Institute of American Indian Arts. She's currently a visiting fellow of race and ethnicity at the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America at Brown University, and the 2021 Mary Rowe Endowed Chair of Creative Writing and Journalism at Scripps College. Her second book, Hyperboreal, winner of the 2012 Donald Hall Prize, will be published in translation by Edition EcoCareers this summer, and a collection of new poems, Dark Traffic, will be published in the Pitt Poetry Series in September. Joan raises her sons in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we're so thankful, Joan, that you have joined us today. I want to mention one of the things that I started to do when I started traveling as an adult and had the means to do so, was I always tried to find a poem or an anthology of poems as one of my souvenirs. Like I would buy trinkets, of course, like everyone does, and I'd also look for an anthology or a poet that really captured the essence of a place, because I really feel as though poetry is such a great way to capture, especially the ephemeral qualities of place. And when I came across your poem, The Straits, in All We Can Save, I got chills, and I don't know if it was the feeling of coldness that the environment being described brought about, or the writing itself, but I really appreciate you coming to us today to talk about your career and your poetry. So go ahead and take it away. Thanks.
Thank you. Wanga tira Naviyuk, awiva mi rurunga sulikaya mi rurunga. I'm called for my namesake, Naviyuk. My family comes from King Island, Naviyuk, and Kawiruk, Mary's Igloo, Alaska. I always introduce myself with the context of my namesake, because in the Inupiaq tradition, we're taught that when we were born, we are said to carry on the Inua, or life force, of an ancestor of ours, someone who's known to our community, who will help shape our consciousness and the decisions that we make and the relationships that we form as we move through the world after we're born. And it's really important for me to acknowledge my namesake and who I'm from, because it's something that I carry with me always. And like other Inupiaq people, I always introduce where I am from, not only to give you some context, but also as a way to affirm my relationship to place and center the way that informs how I move through the world. And also, as an Indigenous person, really allows me to speak with the strength that my connection to the land affords me, and really keeps me grounded. So I really want to emphasize that I'm very grateful to be able to speak with you today. So when talking about being a writer and becoming a writer, and thinking about how this role of being aware of my relationship to place, and how place has formed my identity sort of informs much of the work that I do, I think back to also the traditions and teachings of my community, in the sense that, you know, throughout my career, as sort of unconventional as it might be, I've really sort of relied on the ability to trust my instincts when it comes to making decisions, and when it comes to sort of building a life as a writer, and building a life as a writer and a teacher, that again really focuses on my community's relationship to place and the role it's had in my life. As a King Islander, I think one thing that's important for me, and the reason why place, even though I grew up in Anchorage, an urban area, several thousand miles south of the subarctic and Arctic in Alaska, is that in 1959, King Islanders were forcibly relocated to away from King Island, Naviyuk, and forcibly relocated to the mainland and other places in Alaska and any place there was space in federal housing projects. And so I began my career as a writer from a really young age, having been raised with stories of King Island, a place that had supported my family and my ancestors for millennia, until 1959. And I grew up with stories that detailed our relationship to King Island, the way in which our culture as King Islanders was evolved to the point of such complexity that we could sustain a really large, or sustain a population, a considerable population of King Island people on an island 90 miles out into the middle of the Bering Straits, the Imach, the ocean, for many, many thousands of years, entirely by subsistence off of marine mammals and hunting, and subsistence lifestyle, trading, and working through our trade relationships with villages on the mainland and communities on the mainland of Alaska and also Siberia, and other island cultures, the Diomede Islanders and St. Lawrence Islanders. And I think I bring this up because I was raised aware of the absence I had to a specific place like King Island, but yet raised with learning as much of my dialect, of the King Island dialect of Inupiaq, that I could, and knowing how important it is to Inupiaq people to be able to contextualize their experience through relationship to place. I know participants yesterday were able to hear about the complexities of government to government relationships and self-determination, and what it means to sort of work within the context of a settler colonial government like the United States government as an Indigenous person, but also work through different state governments and jurisdictions that often have competing aims and priorities in terms of intention and sort of communication and community for Indigenous people. So I bring all of this up because as a poet, I was raised again with songs, stories, and an idea of how my people survived on King Island, how my community survived, what my mother's own childhood was like there. And as I became a mother and continued to establish myself as a writer, thinking about how I could pass on this importance of place and belonging and identity to my children, at the same time that I was working in very many different types of jobs in order to allow myself the time that I needed to write, the time and space and kinds of reflection. So I mentioned trusting one's instincts, and part of that has to do with the series of decisions that I made, I guess first coming out of high school in Alaska, and then entering undergraduate, sort of deciding on college, deciding whether or not college in fact was the right choice for me. Again, as a King Island person whose people were forcibly assimilated into United States citizenship and culture in 1959 when Alaska became a state. My own relationship to education comes from this experience of my mother and her brothers and sisters and my mother's generation being taken away from our families as Indigenous people and being subjected to assimilation policies in the US, and being forced to attend boarding schools very distant from home communities. So my own relationship to education when I was in high school and sort of applying to colleges is one, thinking about what kinds of places would be good for me as a first generation college student, as someone whose family background didn't assume that college was necessarily the only choice, the right choice, the most constructive and healthy choice for me as a person, and really kind of, I think as a young person thinking about higher education, really being concerned with at the time the sort of obligations I would have as an individual to be able to pursue a degree in English, and what that would mean, what that would mean for my own intellect and my own sort of intellectual curiosity, and things I was interested in studying, and what that might mean for my family. And I really did choose as a young person to essentially take a gamble and attend Harvard, because I looked at the graduation rates and thinking about my mom's own experience about being unable to complete higher education because of the cost to her family, and I'm thinking about what it would mean for me to be able to attend college. I really wanted to go to school and study in a place where I knew that I would have the support that I could find to be able to finish, and also to be able to read widely and be able to, maybe if I was lucky, try writing for an audience for the first time. So that's how I ended up at Harvard as an undergraduate, really thinking about the liberal arts as a way for me to educate the entirety of my person, but also as a way for me to kind of commit myself to higher education in a place that would, looking at the probability, would likely mean that I would graduate from college. Most people, I think, probably know that Indigenous people in the United States are still, working out our relationship to institutions of higher education, and figuring out in a self-determined way what makes the most sense for us in terms of the skills that we need to survive. Which is to say that I also decided at the end of high school to take a year off and really make sure that I was ready for the commitment of pursuing higher education, and ready to commit myself to getting a degree in English, again, in a language that just in my grandfather's generation, he was a Naviyuk person who spoke no English whatsoever. Thinking about what that would mean for me and my choices going forward in life, and as a person, as a writer, as a prospective writer. And I took a year off after high school before entering and accepting matriculation at Harvard, as a way for me to sort of inform my own obligation to these capitalist structures that not only govern what it means to get an education and become a writer and support oneself and my children, but also what it means to be able to what it means to be able to basically try to find work to support that decision. And so I worked at many different jobs in Alaska for a year before coming here to Harvard. And then at the end of my undergraduate experience, having taken a few creative writing classes and worked in very many different jobs, ranging from a janitor here on campus at Harvard to working in elementary education at the North American Indian Center of Boston, I decided to go back home and pursue a one-year fellowship in journalism and radio, and try to write a little bit more. That's how I came to writing my first poems, and then applying to graduate school at Columbia University in Manhattan, and deciding to pursue a career in writing, and specifically poetry writing, which is another way to say that my career choices have been unconventional. And throughout my graduate education, I continued to work in radio and journalism, and wrote and really became aware of the fact that if I wanted to return to Alaska, a state that doesn't have really any presence of four-year degree granting institutions that are funded and independent of the state system, that I would need to work outside of academia. And if I wanted to write, I needed to make a living in ways that would help me, pay my student loan debt off and support myself, and give me enough time to write, and give me the kind of life that would be able to give me the sort of complexity of subject that writing could afford. So I returned to Alaska, and I ended up working in public policy, and working as a public policy consultant, and traveling extensively in rural Alaska, working with tribes, village corporations, regional corporations that were established by the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and sort of determined how land use and land distribution was established in Alaska in the 1970s. During these years working in public policy and as a public policy consultant, I also worked as Alaska Native Policy Center director for First Alaskans Institute, and really came to understand a lot more and at a much more sort of granular level about the very different types of approaches to sustainable careers, to sustainable communities, and really looking at and being able to understand how my own role as an individual fit into these larger structures that I had absolutely no part in determining, but that really determined every aspect of my life as an Indigenous person, at the level of my relationship to King Island, my own travels back there in 2014, and sort of how all of these things could fuel my writing, and also continue to allow me to have the flexibility to help other writers where I could, to especially encourage writers from outside of dominant culture to find audience and find meaning for their work. So I returned to Alaska, worked in public policy, and continued working on writing, and decided very late, sort of in my process after getting a master's degree in fine arts in writing from Columbia, to work with a really small off-the-grid press in Alaska called North Shore Press. It was run by one writer who decided that she wanted to have a completely sustainable literary press that she wanted to run. So she decided to run a press, North Shore Press, off of a solar cell and in Lake Clark, Alaska. And Alaska, as it's so far north, only gets great solar energy in the summer months when there's basically 24 hours of daylight. My book was going into production. My first book was going into production and launched in October of 2009, which meant that in order for the book to sort of be feasible for her press, people who wanted to buy the book needed to go to her website, print out an order form, send it snail mail to her along with a check, and then she in turn, whenever her partner could get their plane up and running and go to the nearest post office, and everything lined up in terms of the solar cell power of the press, would be able to get books out to audiences. And at this time in late October 2009, just as my book was going to production with this press, I got the news that I was a writing award recipient and was going to be awarded a writing award, along with being considered at that time. The writing awards were awarded to 10 of the most promising writers in the United States in creative writing, playwriting, poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. So it became clear with that news that the more efficient way and the more sustainable way for my book to find audience would be for me to take over the distribution of the book and getting it out to people. All of this while I had one toddler, and my second son was on the way, and working at that time for the Denali Commission, which is a federal agency in Alaska, specifically looking at serving the infrastructure needs of rural communities. So I think in all of these cases, at all these decision points, specifically related to my desire to find work as a writer, again, that would allow me to sort of meet basic needs that I had, and also to allow me the sort of perspective that I need in order to write. I really found that over and over again, I had to make quick decisions, not unlike my community members, my ancestors, who often were looking at questions of survival, kind of on, at the margins of what most people would consider to be a sustainable lifestyle, sort of making decisions in an instant and trusting my instincts, and always thinking about, not only how to get through the present moment, but also how to think as best I could towards a future that has always been uncertain, and sort of uncharted in many ways. The first in my family to go to complete college, first in my family to go to graduate school, and then the first in my family to be able to not only leave Alaska and then return, but also the first in my generation to be able to bring other King Islanders back to King Island. Again, a small island about a mile in diameter that's 90 miles out into the middle of the Bering Straits in Alaska. So I think I haven't read any poems, but I think maybe I'll just stop now and see if there are questions for me. And if not, I'm happy to read poems too.
Yeah, we do have one question that came in already, and that question is, as a first-generation college student, how did you find support along the way for your academic path? Were there professors or other students or other folks that helped you manage that, given that it was an experience that your parents didn't have?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate in the sense that you know, there is the Harvard University Native American program, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. We had it sort of has informed my own work in higher education. But just one particular individual, her name is Eileen Egan, who really advocated for students, and just out of concern for students, and sort of set me up with another Alaska Native student who was a PhD candidate at the time, Dr. Sven Hawkinson, who went on, he now works for the University of Washington Museum, the Burke Museum. But he sort of informally mentored me and got, made once a month, we got together for a meal and just kind of kept tabs on me when I was, and he also knew my family in Alaska and was able to kind of remind me of the big picture of what I was sort of what I was working for, and what I was what a difference it would make for me to be able to complete undergraduate experience, and also to know that it was Harvard is not necessarily a very friendly or non-competitive place. So being able to remind me that my discomfort with some of the dynamics was completely normal, and also okay to talk about. That is to say, it's fine to name when you are stressed. And this is, back in the late 90s. So at a time when conversations about self-care and, prioritizing connecting with people were not sort of at the same place that they are now. But I think that was one thing. The other thing is that it became important for me to understand how my family contextualized my experience. And so one of my aunts, who's now passed away, used to explain to people in Nome, which is the community where most King Islanders, were relocated to, that she would tell people that I was at college, but I was also at the school where John F. Kennedy Jr. went to school. So people would have an understanding that it was there was someone that they knew who'd gone to college, or a public figure that they knew and could sort of identify with. So I guess talking to others always helped me, but also being able to turn to other students at Harvard, students who were also first generation college students and coming from backgrounds outside of dominant culture as well.
Excellent. Christy is asking for you to please share one of your poems. Before you do, I have one more question. My boyfriend and I were watching a Saturday Night Live skit this morning, right before the conference. And there was a skit just this past weekend where they spoofed on parents parents who were not happy about their child choosing to pursue a career in creative writing as opposed to medicine. So what would you say to young people out there who may have this passion, this desire, and hear those messages, because they are pretty prevalent in society, whether it comes from your family members or not?
Yeah, it's funny. My sons, who are 11 and 13, we watch SNL every Saturday that it's on, and we watched it too, and felt that was one of those one of those moments where I'd gone to Harvard, where many SNL writers attended school, and we were wondering if it was we had a response to that. But I mean, again, it's trust your instincts, and make sure that you have a backup plan and a backup plan. That's for any career. But I think our relationship to gig economies has changed so much, and the idea of what's sustainable has changed so much and can change so much, I think, going forward. Yeah, I would always say make sure that you know what your costs are, but that you do trust that you have to nourish yourself as a writer and as an artist, no matter what, as well as much as you have to nourish your physical self. Yeah. Should I read a poem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Sure. This is a poem called A Few Lines for Jordan Tutu, and Jordan Tutu is the first Inuit to have a professional sports career. He played in the NHL for many years. And it started when I read an excerpt of an interview with him, and I'll read this excerpt from him, which is, he wrote, "When I was drinking, I was selfish because of my addiction to popularity and being out in the public eye. I used that as a mechanism to create commotion with everyone. And if I got into trouble away from the rink, I made it up on the ice." And I bring up this quote because when he talks about he says, "And if I got into trouble away from the rink, I made it up on the ice." I was thinking, of course, he's talking about the ice of the hockey rink, but I thought, more specifically, it was able for me to imagine the ice being the sea ice, the Arctic sea ice that connected our communities and our people as Inuit, all the way from the Bering Strait all the way east through Kalaalleq, Greenland. So this is a poem called A Few Lines for Jordan Tutu. What do you see out there on the ice? Perhaps something dark, far off, louder than the bellowing headlines in the otherwise technical silence. In a lecture hall once in EcoCareers, I listened while the ice of the Beaufort Sea split into blue leads 3 months early. What I heard was, if only we learned the old ways, we learn where we fit in life, how critical we are to each other. That a hunt done right results in little suffering or loss. That the migrations of fowl, fish, and mammals will continue. What I wanted to hear was a reassurance, some kind of premonition or promise, like when words come back, so do the other things, or words come back when you have a chance to learn them. Instead, what I hold within is the felt absence of place, a land of great failure, abundance, it goes on without us. Another time up north, maybe by mistake, I was invited to watch the men butchering, but I didn't want to see where it was they found the heart, if they ever did. Like you, in front of me is all I have. In the distance mostly, another world. Okay, so that's one poem, and I'm really grateful for the chance to speak with you today. I do have to teach a class now, but I can hop back on later this afternoon, I think, when there's a chance for networking. If people have questions, you could always drop me a line too at my website, and I'm really just encouraging people to, keep an open mind. Thank you again for this invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story, your personal, your professional story. I was really moving. Really appreciate you taking the time to share all of that with us. And we'll be in touch. And thanks for coming back. If you make it back, check out the lounges. With that, I'll go ahead and make an announcement for the next session. But thank you again for being here today.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Take care. So our next sessions are occurring in the concurrent session portion of the platform. So if you go ahead and look over on the left side of your screen, under main stage concurrent sessions is right there, and you can choose between 2 sessions, one on the high school track and one on the college track, but it's really up to you to decide which session you'd like to listen in on. Thank you all again, and see you in the next session.